Before I share my Yizkor words, I just want to acknowledge what is so obvious to all of us, both here and beyond, and that is that this has been a very strange and challenging number of months. And last night, Linda by name mentioned so many, and so I am not going to be redundant, but I do want to say, to compliment and to praise as effusively as I can all of the professional staff, the lay leaders and the membership of this congregation who have done such a magnificent job these last uncharted months. Together we have kept Congregation Eitz Chaim a vibrant congregation, relevant, responsive, inspiring, creative, and loving. And I just want to say Toda Rabbah from the bottom of my heart, and I know I speak for all who are here and those who are there and beyond, in acknowledging really this labor of love that has come forth from all who are connected to this wonderful, exceptional congregation. And at the end of the day today, we will be reciting Lishana Haba B'Yerushalayim, but I'd like to amend it a little bit, and instead of saying Lishana Haba B'Yerushalayim, Lishana Haba'ah, next year and hopefully sooner, not Jerusalem, but back here in our own shul. He was a teenager far from his home in Lodz, drafted into the Tsar's army, a foot soldier in World War I. Shot in the leg and in the head, he lay dying in the muddy trenches of Eastern Europe, entangled in barbed wire, slowly bleeding to death. As he moaned in what he believed were his last moments on earth, I can only imagine his thoughts. Miles from home, who among his loved ones would know his fate? Alone in the cold, dark fog of war. After gasping his final puff of air, his remains would slowly decay in a distant, unknown place. Would he mumble the Shema with his last breath? Would he shed bitter tears in his hideous solitude, knowing that above him there would never be a tombstone bearing his name? Does he shiver, fearing he will be lost in a desolate field for all eternity? Not a whisper in the wind that he ever existed. Weeping silently as he awaited his fate, the stench of death and gas filled his nostrils. The fury of bursting bombs in the roaring night sky, the ear-splitting collision of colliding bayonets. And beneath him, soon to be his grave, puddles of blood, worms, and grubs. Would hope and mystery prevent his pious parents from reciting Kaddish, from ripping their garments? Would confused neighbors avoid an awkward visit, uncertain how to behave? The suffering went beyond self. As he groaned his last groans, as a chill grew within, as despair dragged him to the edge of oblivion, a fellow soldier stumbling through debris and lifeless bodies heard his faint, desperate cries and incredibly lifted him up, carried him to a field hospital where his life was saved. He died 56 years later in Beverly Hills, California, on the 12th of January, 1970, the 5th day of Shevat, 5730. He was mourned by a loving daughter and a devoted son, by grandchildren, by relatives, by students he taught and inspired from his shul in Brooklyn to his last position teaching Talmud at Temple Beth Am on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles. This story haunts me because it reminds me that destiny is ever so fragile. Tipping points, the stuff of fleeting seconds. That salvation can come from a passerby who lifts up a stranger on a faraway battlefield. This story haunts me because it is personal. It is the story of my Zeta, my mother's father, Rabbi Aaron Einhorn, who nearly perished in the Great War, alone, forgotten, dust. The departed and the bereaved, nearly robbed of irreplaceable tears, of a bedside farewell, of a final embrace. Neighbors pouring through an open door laden with mandel bread and hugs. It was Friday the 13th. Who would have imagined that this day of superstition would turn real and mark the start of a worldwide catastrophe? The date was a warning, but it was dismissed along with black hats and broken mirrors. We had a late lunch at Capozzi's, eggplant parmesan, angel hair with mushrooms. We shared a Greek salad, blissfully ignorant of what was blowing in the wind. The next day, the 14th, was a well-attended Shabbos service honoring the members of our Chavurot. The pews were alive with the sound of davening. The service was like any other, but there were clues that something was about to change. After Kiddush and Hamotzi, the wine was not sipped nor the challah handed out. Lunch was a pre-smeared bagel and a cookie in a bag handed to the folks as they left. The pace was hurried, as if a mighty storm was gathering and we were all in search of shelter. As the sanctuary emptied, an unfamiliar sadness lingered. A shadowy gloom filled this holy space. Somehow we all knew we were not soon coming back. And then with dazzling speed, we entered a world transformed with new etiquette, with new vocabulary, with new rules. In a shocking instant, we were turned upside down. Businesses shuttered, all the familiar places closed, restrictions imposed. It felt as if we were suddenly occupied by a foreign power. We understood what was happening and why, but still were mired in disbelief. Days before, hours before, we went to the movies, dined at restaurants, carpooled, attended ball games, shook hands. Life was carefree, spontaneous, untroubled. And then came masks, social distancing, Zoom, empty streets, and quiet boulevards. We retreated into our homes, fearful of an invisible threat. We avoided contact with neighbors and friends. No one could be trusted. All were suspect. With reluctance and caution, we ventured out to pick up needed supplies. In truth, we ate well, Netflixed, Amazoned, but as day followed day, we came to realize the insidious, hidden nastiness of this virus, the true cruelty of the pandemic. Technology and creative ingenuity helped, but not nearly enough. It is the isolation that has crushed our hearts and beaten up our souls. We plod through each day, but long to be touched. We ache for a simple caress, a soft kiss. We are living the lyrics turned prophecy of Bob Dylan, "You never miss your water till your well runs dry." My friends, we are all parched. Our lips crave a sip of water. From the depths of our gilded quarantine, we have come to loathe the solitude. Normal is only a sigh away, but we are told, keep your distance. It is excruciating. We hurt from the loneliness and the torture of inches. Somehow, Maya Angelou, in a poetic premonition, captured the angst of our times. Alone, lying, thinking last night how to find my soul a home where water is not thirsty and bread loaf is not stone. I came up with one thing, and I don't believe I'm wrong, that nobody, but nobody, can make it out here alone. There are some millionaires with money they can't use. Their wives run around like banshees. Their children sing the blues. They've got expensive doctors to cure their hearts of stone. But nobody, no, nobody can make it out here alone. Now, if you listen closely, I'll tell you what I know. Storm clouds are gathering. The wind is gonna blow. The race of man is suffering, and I can hear the moan, 'cause nobody, but nobody, can make it out here alone. We have all become victims of this worldwide calamity, the high and the mighty, the lowly and the humble, and all those in between. The race of man is suffering, and I can hear the moan, 'cause nobody, but nobody, can make it out here alone. We are all familiar with the famous prayer, Matovu. We learned it as children in junior congregation, sang it in our youth group, and it is the opening melody in many Shabbos services. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. When uttered thousands of years ago by Bilam on the plains of Moab, it was meant as a blessing. But permit me a traditional revisionist commentary that turns the popular praise into a curse, where the flattery is meant to bring destruction to our ancestors. Folks, Bilam says, your tents, your dwelling places are marvelous. There, all your needs are met. There, all your desires are fulfilled. Therefore, stay home. You need not seek community to join together with others, to interact with neighbors. Treasure your isolation. We know, of course, that such sequestering would have brought tragedy and ruination to our people, indeed, to all people. Though our tents and our dwelling places today are goodly, they have become silk-stocking prisons, and we long to be on the other side of the wall. In time, this plague will end. We will emerge with a hangover of the spirit. There will be damage, reflective cocktail chatter, weird nostalgic conversations. But we will freely laugh once again in the relief of a vaccine, and we will move on as our wounds heal. Masks will come off. 6-foot floor markers will be rubbed clean by the pounding feet of the newly liberated. Planes will fly, streets will bustle, restaurants will serve, camps will open. When Fauci sounds the all clear, we will party like it's 1999. But there is a collateral damage from which many will not so easily recover. A hurt that will not be cured by a needle in the arm. The ultimate insult to human dignity, unforeseen, unconsidered. It is the heartbreak of those who left us these past 7 months with no loved ones by their side. No familiar faces, no warm tears dripping down cheeks. In their last hours on earth, alone. A cruel fate, undeserved, an irretrievable moment in time. And then there is the heartbreak of those left behind who sat Shiva alone with no one by their side, craving a knock on the door, a memory shared by a welcome visitor, a cruel fate undeserved, an irretrievable moment in time. Those who endured such sorrow will be haunted as they come to struggle to come to terms with these moments that have been forever stolen away. As I think back to my Zadie nearly dying alone on a distant battlefield, for me, fate was kind. But not so for the casualties of COVID, both the departed and the bereaved. It was said that life's greatest trauma, as either victim or observer, is made even worse by being thrust into a hell of solitude. Our faith has a tender heart and understands the harrowing power of finality and the human need to bid a proper farewell. Judaism recognizes the distillation of a lifetime is expressed in the cauldron of but a few hours, in the intensity of but a few words. The last farewell had to be done right for all who left the fading light of day and entered the darkness of night. Companionship for a departing soul, a hand gently held, a forehead sweetly stroked, a cheek tenderly kissed. As we escort a guest to the door when it is time to leave, so too do we escort a loved one to the door of eternity and bid them well on their journey. But what if we cannot accompany them? What if they are sent off alone? What if their bedsides are unattended, their loved ones in the distance? The cemetery is a confusing place, a hole, a shovel, a pile of dirt, and a box. A collision of the known and of the unknown, the end and the endless. But typically the grief is softened by a huddling crowd, a chorus of sniffling, thumps of soil pounding the coffin. We are not alone. But what if we are? What if we gaze into the grave with no one by our side, no one to hold us up in our time of collapse? When we return home, we wash our hands and nibble some eggs. There is relief. We are exhausted, but the Shiva home somehow feels good. The covered mirrors, the scattered chairs, piles of saran-wrapped pastries. There is laughter and there is chatter. Familiar bodies scurrying from room to room. An energy of love squeezes out the sadness. We are not alone. But what if we are? What if there is no commotion? No one to offer us a fistful of tissues to snuggle up next to on a sofa. A lonely candle flickering on the mantle, shadows in the silence of an empty house. Judaism protects us from the harshness of death and the unforgiving pain of loss. It surrounds us, cradles us, shields us from unprecedented fear and unprecedented suffering. But when that spirit of comfort is taken from us, when we are thrust into a hell of solitude, when we are deprived of what we desperately need to go gently into that good night, or to rise up gently into that good new dawn, we stumble and we are lost in our aloneness. A woodcutter came to the rabbi of his village. "Rabbi, I wish to please God, but I do not know what to do. I am too poor to give charity. I cannot afford kosher meat. I rise early in the morning and do not pray, and I work 7 days a week and am unable to observe the holy Sabbath. What am I to do?" The rabbi listened respectfully to the young woodcutter and replied, "My son, if you wish to please the Almighty, then do as I say. Seek out those who live alone, are near death, and have no one. Tend to their needs. Provide them with food to eat. Give them tea with honey. Bandage their wounds, chant psalms, hold them in your arms, and promise you will be with them when the Malach HaMaves comes for their soul. If you wish to please the Almighty, then do as I say. Seek out those who have lost a loved one, returned from a funeral and have no guests in their Shiva home. Tend to their needs, wipe away their tears, serve them a meal, pray with them, raise them up, and together whisper softly the words of the Kaddish. Do these holy deeds, said the rabbi, and you will please Hashem." The woodcutter left and did what the rabbi told him, and in time the woodcutter found favor in the eyes of God. On the darkest day of the Jewish calendar, Tisha B'Av, we read the darkest book of the Bible, Lamentations. The opening words are a terrifying, piercing cry by the prophet Jeremiah. Echa yashva badad. How can one dwell alone? How can one dwell in solitude? But in these past months, we have come to witness that even greater sorrow. How can one die and how can one mourn alone in solitude? We need the intimate touch of humanity, and for many, it has been stolen away. We feel their ache from afar and we hear their sobbing in the distance, but we are frustrated bystanders, caring but helpless, blowing kisses into the wind. We have all been victims of COVID, but many among us have been battered by moments that will never return. For them, in their unique grief, perhaps the words of Midrash offer some solace. It is taught that those who leave this earth alone and those who mourn their departed alone, both are greeted at the gates of heaven by a band of angels playing the flute, the lyre, and the harp. Friends, whatever our tribulations have been these last months, we have endured as a community. When we finally join together in celebration and toss off our masks, we will shout out in triumphant reunion, Chazak, Chazak, v'nitchazek. We have been tested, we have been strong, and we have overcome. We will once again fearlessly hug and joyously kiss those who we have missed for so long. And as I share in the glorious restoration of normal, I will look up into the blue sky and quietly thank God Almighty that my Zeta made it to Beverly Hills.